Welcome. You're listening to Ask the Doulas, a podcast where we talk to experts from all over the country about topics related to pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and early parenting. Let's chat.
Hello. This is Kristin Revere with Ask the Doulas, and I am thrilled to chat with Barbara Nelson today. Barbara is a pediatric speech and language pathologist and a certified lactation counselor who specializes in infant feeding. She owns January Consulting, creating educational resources to help parents feel confident in feeding their babies and recognizing red flags early. Barbara is also the host of How to Feed Your Baby podcast, and she provides free resources on her website, Feeding by January. Welcome, Barbara.
Hi, thanks, Kristin. I'm excited to be here.
I am so excited to chat about recognizing those red flags early on and any sort of issues that we can come across with bottle feeding. Those pitfalls can happen and throw you off course. So I would love to pick your brain about how, as postpartum doulas and birth doulas, we can better support our bottle feeding families.
Yeah, absolutely. There are definitely a few common pitfalls that I see pretty frequently. And before we get to those, just sort of knowing the general red flags, right? Obviously, if weight gain is an issue, babies gaining weight too rapidly, there's reflux, pain, discomfort, coughing or choking, wet, gurgly, funky sounding meals. Those would all be signs that we need to figure out why. And sometimes it's a super simple solution, and sometimes it's something that surprises us but still needs to be addressed. So obviously, if there's something funky going on and a baby's not settled after the feeds as they should be, then those would be pretty obvious red flags to get additional help. But there's also some really super simple common pitfalls that I see a lot that parents, especially with the right support, can avoid. For example, one really common pitfall is that we tend to treat bottle-fed babies differently than breastfed babies. And what I mean by that is because we can see how much milk is in the bottle, whether you're formula feeding or expressing your breast milk, we tend to watch the bottle instead of the baby. We tend to watch the paper schedule instead of the babies. I always encourage families to learn infant cues, take some type of class that teaches you to watch the baby instead of the bottle. Because although it is really reassuring for myself included, I come from a background of a hospital, so I'm like measure everything. I understand that that's really helpful and important fact to have or write down, and that the doctor's always going to ask you. But when we only look at that, we miss signs of satiation. We miss the sign that the baby needs to slow down. We miss the sign that the baby's done. Their belly can't take anymore. And when you think about the difference in experience, how you are fed as a baby is absolutely shapes your mealtime experience for the rest of your life. Not that you can't have a problem and recover and mealtime be positive, but it is really important. And you can imagine if someone's pouring liquid down your throat too fast, you're going to be a little more defensive at mealtime. Whereas if it was slow, they were following your cues, it felt comfortable, it felt social, it felt cozy, you were comfortable and took a little nap afterward, that is going to be something you lean into. These things are important. So I always say first that you can still do cue-based feeding, even if you're bottle feeding, even if the doctor gives you that like 1987 schedule of this many ounces, this many hours. If your baby tells you something different, let's listen to the baby. And after that, if they're not getting what they need or there's a problem, well, then there's a problem. The paper schedule wasn't going to fix anyway. So that's the first thing that I think we need to consider is you can cue-based feed your baby even if you're using a bottle. Then another bottle thing that I see a lot is sort of mixing and matching bottle nipples by accident. So there have been plenty of studies on this. Patos, Park, and Dojal, for example, did a study where they took the same pressure pump, so they made all the factors to see how quickly these different bottle nipples flow rates were based on their label. And what they learned and what we know is that the way that a bottle nipple is labeled, so when you go to Target or wherever you get your bottles and it says 0+ months, slow flow, newborn, anticolic, whatever, that actually, there's no standardization for that. The company made it up. It's marketing. They just want you to buy their bottle. So what happens is families might be gifted several different bottles. Their baby shower, for example, we're using 0 months, or we're using slow flow, or they're both Avent. Well, according to that study, the Philips Avent natural flow nipple, which is labeled 0+ months, had a flow rate of about 2.25 milliliters per minute. Okay. But the same brand, the Philips Avent anti-colic nipple, which is also labeled for 0+ months, was tested to have a 17.44 milliliters per minute of flow rate when you given the same suction. So same brand, same age recommendation, same suction, made a huge difference. I mean, you're talking about less than a half an ounce in 5 minutes and almost 3 ounces in a 5-minute period. That is a huge distinction. So again, it's important to watch your baby. Even if it says 0 months, you want to watch your baby. If they're dribbling or gulping, it's too fast. And to understand that when you switch around, even within the same brand, that you're not always getting a stair step. So I would say, like, if you picked a brand and you love the brand, see if you can go down in that brand instead of changing around the bottle type. Unless, of course, there's a reason to change the bottle. But so often they're on this roller coaster and they're learning. So it's hard to learn, sometimes learning on a pre-sun straw, and sometimes you're learning on like a smoothie straw.
And the baby's like, what's going on?
Yeah, it could be a little tricky. Some babies don't have, they'll eat whatever and they do fine, even though you and I might look and say, well, they're gulping a lot. They're just surviving this meal, but people don't seem to notice and they seem to move on. But I would argue that it's probably better to keep it simple and not switch it out. But that's a common pitfall that parents might have. They buy a Dr. Brown's bottle, which comes with a level 1 nipple. Maybe they buy a size down nipple and they're all in the same drawer, right? And you can't see that number on the side of them. You got to like hold it up to the light. Like you can't see that at night. You got to
exactly. And if you have other caregivers, like grandparents or doulas or nannies, partners, and they're just grabbing whatever they see and whatever might be sterilized.
Yes. So set the environment up, right? If you're like, these are the nipples we're using, the other ones have to be like somewhere where it would be hard to get to them. Then nobody makes a mistake and it's so much easier. So, but that's a common one. And I just want to point out too that those rates and the ounces that I quoted from the study, that's not how fast your baby will take, or any given baby will take that milk. That was a study with a pump. Baby's oral shape, suction, strength, size. There's a ton of unique factors that go into how fast a baby drinks a bottle, including how big that nipple hole is. But that's not saying that's how fast that baby should take the bottle. That's just saying apples to apples, that there's a huge difference in this hole size and the shape of the bottle. That's all that means.
Good point. Yes.
Yeah.
And I feel like there is that reassurance where you can visually see whether it's a formula-fed baby or a pumped milk bottle-fed baby, where how much intake is. Where with breastfeeding, you don't fully know how a feed goes other than the weighted feeds to measure. Families often feel like they're underfeeding and then they supplement, or they're talking to other medical professionals like a pediatrician or a lactation consultant, and they're feeling like they can't produce enough. So they get into this cycle of either adding pumping or supplementing.
Think about most of the new parent books or the newborn care books. They're all volume based.
Yes.
Right. And we're coming 100%. Off of generations who are primarily bottle fed. So I think this is more of lack of trust because our language hasn't aligned yet with what moms want. And what I mean by that is that there absolutely are signs that your baby's getting enough, but because it's not the norm that we focus on, we don't yet trust it, or we don't know it because nobody tells it to us. Your baby's output, they having adequate wet diapers and stools, that is absolutely trustworthy. I would argue more trustworthy than weighted feed, because a weighted feed is one snapshot. And while it's really very important, always recommend if a mom is concerned, whether I see concerns or not, a weighted feed, it brings such comfort because it gives you that measurement. And there are babies who look like they're eating and they're not transferring. So it's such a helpful tool. But when you have a baby who is pretty perky and vigorous at the breast, not upset, but active, and their output is good, and at the end of the feed, they look like relaxed hands, Thanksgiving dinner, like their belly's bigger, your breast is less full. Thanks, mom. Like, that was great. Let's nap. You can trust that. We don't talk about that. The doctor wants to know the schedule. They want to know the volume. So I just think as the language changes, I think we will get more trust in those other kinds of measurements.
Hey, Alyssa here. I'm just popping in to tell you about our course called Becoming. Becoming a Mother is your guide to a confident pregnancy and birth, all in a convenient 6-week online program. From birth plans to sleep training and everything in between, you'll gain the confidence and skills you need for a smooth transition to motherhood. Live coaching calls with me and Kristin, tons of expert videos including chiropractic care, pelvic floor physical therapy, mental health experts, breastfeeding, and so much more. You'll also get a private Facebook community with other mothers going through this at the same time as you to offer support and encouragement when you need it most. If you'd like to learn more about the course, you can email us at info@goldcoastdoulas.com or check it out at thebecomingcourse.com. We would love to see you there. We also have a book called Supported, Your Guide to Birth and Baby, which makes a beautiful companion to this course. It's a great book for any expecting mother and is the perfect baby shower gift. You can find information on that book at supportedbook.com.
So Barbara, with other caregivers, and even we've talked about nipple size and flow and so on, but even the way a bottle is held or feeding is done by different caregivers, whether it's a nanny, a grandparent, partner, or the mother. And we should talk a bit about different techniques. And I'm a big fan of paste bottle feeding to mimic breastfeeding and slow things down a bit. What are your thoughts as a professional in this space?
This is such a good question. And I have an unpopular view on this among the lactation community, but I'm going to share it anyway. So I will say that I understand the value of paste bottle feeding, because I think with bottles, we tend to hurry and high volume feed our kids. And when they don't have adequate breaks and they don't have a good appropriate pace at feeding, just like all of us, when we shovel, right, we're uncomfortable afterward because we're like, oops, we were just like shoveling. We didn't realize. So I will say that I'm a fan. However, the reason I don't recommend it very frequently is because I find that it is really hard for caregivers sometimes, and it is really hard for other family members to appropriately pace bottle feed. What happens is mom is like really in tune with that baby, and she's sort of following the baby and giving those breaks as needed. Great. However, then grandma comes along and she's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 break. And it's actually more disorienting to the baby. So in some cases, I would almost prefer that the baby be on a very slow flow, like a Dr. Brown newborn or maybe a pigeon, super slow flow rate. One of the bottles that we know is actually slower. And of course, you watch the baby and you adjust as they need it. But if it's slow enough, then not too slow, but if it's slow enough, the baby will pace themselves. They take breaks, and you will see them drink and swallow and then take breaks as they need. And then the caregiver can just sort of take the bottle out as needed, give them burp breaks. But I always find that, if it's done well, great. If it's not done well, it's probably creating more tension and frustration and coordination confusion than good. Does that make sense?
It does.
Kind of a double-sided answer.
With different caregivers and confusing the baby with different styles of feeding. Again, that trying to have baby gulp it down as quickly as possible versus slowing things down. But if you already have a bottle system that is slower, then it would be easier for any caregiver to help with feeding. So I can totally agree with that. And we try to educate, our clients in different bottle feeding techniques, but it can be challenging when there are a lot of people involved in baby's care.
Yeah. And I think so the more you can standardize the things that can't be messed up, picking the right nipple and things like that, and supporting them to have the baby in the right position, those I think are helpful because some people are really naturally do pace bottle feeding and some don't. And I also want to make the distinction between pace bottle feeding as far as trying to support, follow baby's cues and have sort of a natural rhythm and natural breaks in the feed compared to medical strict pace bottle feedings. In the speech pathology world, if I have an infant with dysphagia who's not coordinating their suck, swallowing, breathing, so they might be suck, swallow, but not breathing, or they might be sucking in milk or having a hard time coordinating that, we may, especially like NICU baby who has an immature sucking, swallowing, breathing pattern, we may do what's called strict pacing. So we may be counting 3 sucks and then you gently tip the bottle so that they can take a breath. So you are cueing them to get that pattern and learn that skill. And I just want to make the distinction that that is a separate, different type of pacing than
absolutely, yes. The NICU
the full-term
babies and their
newborn
needs are much different, or any medically complex.
And that baby, like grandma has to get on board if she's feeding. We can't just change the nipple. But yeah, every family's so unique. So I would sort of defer to what is it looking like when that particular caregiver is offering the bottle? Does it look like baby's getting frustrated and swallowing more air and getting more discoordinated, or are they taking the bottle all the way out? And that, how's the baby handling it and how's the caregiver able to respond? That's how I sort of coordinate my recommendations as far as the normal natural pace bottle feeding that we try to offer for a healthy newborn.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what other pitfalls are you seeing?
Oh gosh. Well, a big one is when it comes to formula, improper mixing is a big one. So most powdered formulas always read the label because you have to read the label to know for sure. But most of them, you are supposed to measure the water out, and it should be sterilized water for a newborn. Not always because the water has an issue. We think, oh, is the water clean? Okay, I'll get distilled water. I'll get baby safe water. The formula has been through a factory. That powder has been through an entire factory, bacteria. I mean, it's processed food. So to also make sure that the formula is safe for the babies, particularly very little babies. So when they're newborn, you actually are supposed to boil that water. First, you measure the water. Then you put the scoop in, and it should be like that even scoop. And when we're sleep deprived, we're like, here's a heaping scoop.
Right.
Oops, I put it in the bottle first. There's all different ways, easy ways. But when we do it out of order, it changes the calorie content. And when it comes to formulas, particularly powder formulas, there is a higher iron content. There's higher additives because they're not as bioavailable to guts as breast milk, which means that more is put in to hopefully offset that. Also means you can get more constipated. So it just depends on everybody's makeup. But when you are not mixing properly, we might be accidentally giving baby a higher calorie formula, a more condensed caloric version. And those change the hydration content. And all of these things impact gut, how we digest, how we grow, and things like that. And while it's not this common, oops, you put like a tiny bit more than level, I don't mean to freak anybody out. If you really drill in ahead of time, the order, and it is important. And I think it's such a simple thing to learn ahead of time and kind of keep an eye on or make a little visual for grandma. Grandmas are great. This is not,
it's hard to read those containers, especially in the middle of the night. So
they're tiny. Yeah. So,
yes.
So knowing ahead of time, but I think those are common ones. People don't wash their hands.
Right.
And your baby's putting their mouth all over you, whatever. But anybody that comes into the house, they need to be washing their hands before they mix that. I mean, arguably everyone, but But the improper mixing is a really common one. And I think when you combine improper mixing and then you are looking at, oh, we have to finish all these 3 ounces and the baby's not able to tolerate it. Now we're looking at reflux. Now we're looking at it's hard for me to sleep. Now we're looking at I'm not comfortable. So you can have issues that wouldn't otherwise be issues just by avoiding these very simple things.
You talked about sanitation and safety and making sure that bottles are properly sanitized and cleaned and
oh yeah, nothing is
also
more off-putting than seeing like a dirty, crusty bottle nipple come into the clinic. You're like, this is going in your baby's mouth and their entire digestive system. And again, if they're not getting breast milk, they're also not getting those immune supporters. So it's arguably even more important to be extra careful when we think about how we store. I mean, formula should not be stored in a hot car. Bottle, if you use water that's been sitting in plastic, like it definitely should not be sitting in a hot car. We're busy. It's hard, but these are important things. Once you get the system down, I think it's easy. And the other thing I'd like to say about formula and even donor breast milk would be, I meet a lot of moms who have supplementation without education. So their feeding plan was to breastfeed or at least to initiate breastfeeding. And for maybe whatever reason, it didn't go quite as planned, or they ran into a couple of speed bumps or roadblocks with that. So while they're trying to figure that out, the doctor says the baby's not gaining, here's some sample formula or whatever to supplement. However, they never educated the mother on how to support her breast milk supply. So if you do that for a week, now it's going to take you doubly long. Now you have missed time. It's much harder to recover from a decrease in supply than it is to just build it from the get-go. So that happens a lot.
Your body doesn't think that it needs to make milk if
exactly
you're supplementing in that
exactly.
way.
And that happens for moms who go back to work accidentally sometimes too, because our culture has a lot of oversupply. What's normal is a freezer full of milk here, and that is oversupply. Anything you supply that is beyond your baby's caloric needs, technically oversupply. And that can come with a whole host of issues, actually. When you have that freezer milk and you go back to work, if you're using it and then you're not still pumping or removing that daily amount of milk-ish, I'm not talking one time, I'm saying like your regular routine, your supply will go down because your body's, we don't need to make as much. Everybody's happy. So when that happens, again, you can accidentally mess with your supply. It's harder to recover. It's better to be aware, but I find that doctors aren't always mentioning this or even providing a name of someone who and saying, hey, we need to make sure baby gets a few more calories, but this is the person who can help you. We could use this tool. We don't want to lose sight of what mom's goal is at any given point. That happens a lot. By the time they see a lactation consultant, we're several days in, which means a harder road to get back to where she wants to be.
So true.
That's sad to see. Yeah.
So how did you transition from working in a clinical setting to pivoting to starting your own educational resource business and podcast? I'm curious before end this to get more of your personal passion and perspective on feeding.
I worked for over a decade in like a clinic, very Western medical setting, but even in the outpatient clinic, I really enjoyed the infant feeding perspective. I've always really enjoyed supporting families with that. And we would have parents come in and their baby may have dysphagia or they're doing a NICU follow-up and they really want to breastfeed. And I found in my system, and I think you'll find across many hospital systems, that it's really not set up. Even though we have great NICU lactation consultants, we didn't have any outpatient lactation. We really did not have a system set up to support that. So I felt like you can only speak to what you know. By nature, we're very bottle biased. And particularly in a medical system, we're not thinking about can we use a scale to give that baby credit for that feed. I went on to get my CLC and get all the hours for the IBCLC and things like that. basically, I felt like it was a huge gap in the system, and I still feel like it is. And I do still think in-home support for that when babies are really little is best, because it is very disrupting to a feeding schedule to go to appointments and sit in a waiting room and be off schedule. And if you tell a mom, well, you got to pump this many times a day, but they are out for 3 hours with their 2-week-old baby, it's very disruptive. So recognizing all of that, but still wanting to support whatever mom's feeding plan is. And for some of our really dysphasic babies or babies with craniofacial abnormalities, sometimes that means you get part of breastfeeding. Sometimes they can suckle. Sometimes they can do an alternative supplemental system. Sometimes that means skin to skin. Sometimes that means mom's breast milk, but in a bottle. I mean, when we think about the benefits of breastfeeding, there's a long list. You can still get many of them if there is a barrier to exclusive breastfeeding for you. You can still get so many of those benefits in many other ways. So wanting to support that was what got me interested in it. And then after my son was born, I just didn't want to go back to that work schedule anymore, but I needed to do something because I just need to be busy and do something. So that's when I started have a few private clients and really wanted to start making resources so that these are the kind of conversations and that we can change the language from here's the schedule to what is your goal? How can I help you support your goal and educate you so that you can be your own advocate and get the support you need and understand infant cues instead of just the schedule? So that's sort of what led me, my path, so to speak.
So how can our listeners connect with your amazing resources and all of the different channels in which they can reach out?
I have the How to Feed Your Baby podcast, which has a lot of infant feeding information on it. It's a little misleading because I also do interview other maternity as well as postpartum professionals, because it turns out what's good for mom is good for baby. And we really can't dissect this period. It has to be a whole thing. So the How to Feed Your Baby podcast. I also have a lot of free resources on feedingbyjanuary.com. And that's where you can contact me if you have any questions. I don't mind emailing back. There's free resources and downloads on there. There's a link to a feeding course, which basically goes over a lot of cue-based feeding and things like that and how to prepare. And half of that is free. We made that for a company that we collaborated with. There's a lot of free options on there. I don't want there to be any barriers to this information, which I do feel like everyone should have access to. But those would be the ways to get more info.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I'll have to have you back on again. You are a wealth of knowledge.
Yes, thank you for having me, Kristin.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to Ask the Doulas. For more information about Gold Coast Doulas, visit us on our website, goldcoastdoulas.com. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and give us a 5-star review. Thank you. Remember, these moments are golden.